So a while back, I started seeing these video essays on YouTube about who the best Batman villain actually is. Like a weird amount. Even fucking Hugabees did one, and I was like, okay, no, I have to weigh in now. It's definitely not a coincidence that most of the ones I saw were talking about Batman the Animated Series. The hype around the show is well earned. It's the best in almost every aspect, no contest in my opinion. The tone is perfectly balanced, the music is honestly kind of astounding for a TV show. And maybe most importantly, it redefined or even flat out invented versions of these characters that we still take as gospel today. Mr. Freeze and Harley Quinn are the first ones that come to mind, but there's one that I think gets overlooked, and it's the one that I have the most thoughts about. Way more thoughts than anyone should ever have about Oswald Chesterfield Cobblepot. I have my reasons. I think if you ask any queer nerd what their favorite Batman villain is, they'll have an essay prepared on like the randomest guy. I've heard a couple other penguins, there's some Scarecrow, a Man-Bat. I have this one friend who's ride or die for Creeper, so... But mine is definitely Penguin, and especially the one from BTAS. I'm gonna have to decide if I want to read that the way I typed it, or if I want to say Batman the Animated Series every time. I really do think it's the best interpretation I've seen, and the funniest thing about it is, I think most of it, if not all of it, was completely an accident. Part 1. The design. If you're familiar with this show, and the production of it in any way, it's not a secret that this was not the original way that they designed Penguin at first. All of the designs in the show are very comic compliant, complete with the over-articulate tuxedo man who owned a nightclub. But Warner Brothers wanted the characters' designs to generally match the most recent films, and this wasn't generally a problem because there were only like 4 characters, and almost all of them were basically identical to their comic versions. Almost all of them. You see where I'm going with this. The studio said, this man must look like Danny DeVito, and the best part is that they were so paranoid about production shots leaking to the public that they wouldn't send the animation team photos of DeVito's makeup. So they dragged Bruce Timm's ass to the studio in person to basically do anatomy studies of this guy that they didn't even want in their show. In all of these photos, I like to imagine Bruce Timm just like right off camera, scowling like a pen and paper. So they had to change the design, but they weren't going to change the writing. I have no idea how much, if any, writing was already done for him, but either way, it was pretty much already settled on, just like the design had been. Plus, as much as I love Batman Returns, I can't see DeVito's Penguin matching with this tone. Can you fucking imagine? But this led to something really interesting. Up to that point, and often afterwards, you could basically get either the stuffy, normal guy Burgess Meredith type Penguin, or crass, deformed, animalistic Danny DeVito type Penguin, and they never overlapped until this point, and only occasionally do now. This time in particular, we got the very flowery writing with this quote-unquote uglier design, and I'll be real, I really like it. It gives a lot more depth right off the bat. Penguin, here and elsewhere, is an outsider, a poser. It makes a lot of sense that the more physically outcast Penguin would try harder to look and sound eloquent. Not just because he's some shallow, stupid guy that thinks it'll bring him power, I mean that's part of it, but also because he has to fight to be seen as a person at all. And with this design and this writing, it's an easy conflict to ascertain visually, and it's much more interesting than just a guy who is greedy or a monster who was born evil. There's something very Richard III about it, to be honest. I also think Paul Williams' soft voice fits much better with this odd hermit, almost cryptid version of Penguin, more than the stern, straight-laced club owner, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure he was cast before the change. It helps that Williams' performance itself is done in this strange, kind of indeterminate inflection that reminds me most of transatlantic, which, if you're familiar with the term, you'll know is fake. It was made up entirely for old films so everyone would sound consistent and nice, but no one has ever spoken like that unless it's for a performance. Part 2. The production, or the writer's Bible. Most shows in the concept stage have what's called a Bible. It includes lore, world building, concept art, characters, and how they should be written, and the Batman the Animated Series one, as of writing the script at least, is online in PDF form. As far as I can tell, that's pretty rare. I have never seen this for any other show. And this one's got some juicy bits in it. I really love Joker's concept art here. It's slightly more detailed and you really get the full picture of what they'd envisioned, but that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about Penguin and all his fun changes and shit. My favorite piece of his is this unfinished art that they awkwardly pasted the new design onto and just kept both. But what I really want to talk about is the backstory, or eventual lack thereof, because I'm pretty sure this was also written before the changes happened. This is pretty much verbatim from a recent comic at the time, and one I really like actually, but that was a more conventional version of the character. But Batman Returns is very different. So, did they switch the backstory? They didn't change the writing, and there's no reason that most of this couldn't still apply. But all of the other details about the character clearly aren't accurate anymore either, so is all of it wrong? Did they ever come up with a consistent other idea? Or something in between, like a compromise? Well, I kind of got an answer. And this is the part of the script where you're going to have to take my word for it, because I was at a Comic-Con recently with Dan Reba, Kevin Altieri, and Alan Burnett, and I got to ask them about it. I asked, since there was such a curveball thrown at them, did they ever come up with any sort of internal consistency on what they wanted the character to be? Or did they just kind of throw in the towel and do whatever? And he literally rolled his eyes and kind of grimaced and said, no, we never came up with a good Penguin. You know, the one that's in the video games that's a Brit? Classic gangster type. I wish we had done something like that. So here's some proof that I was there, here's proof that they were there, here's where they signed my sketchbook, and here's where I wrote down Alan's quote before I forgot it, before I put it in my script. So this confirmed a couple things to me. One, that they had really no plan. They never got back on track with any kind of consistency, at least until the new Batman Adventures. Two, that there's still some ongoing hostility towards the character just because of the whole ordeal. It just seemed like at that point they didn't want to deal with him. So, how does this all tie together? Part 3, the tragedy. It sounds so dramatic, I just didn't know what else to call this section. Say the info in the writer's Bible doesn't apply. Say the movie doesn't apply either, because it doesn't seem to. Say we have no idea. What are we left with? What's in the actual show? This is a character who's considered a freak in the same vein as a lot of the others, but with no real powers like Croc or Ivy, no influence like Joker or even his own comic version has, and not even any sort of connections to other characters like family or friends. His mother, the single person that he had a connection with in any of the comics, is absent. He doesn't really have any henchmen consistently. He doesn't even seem to have any consistent pet birds besides once. He's mocked, pitied, or hated by anyone who encounters him. He's completely unwanted by civilized society and even his villain friends. Penguin has a very weird relationship to the other rogues. On the surface, they are friendly, and when they're together, he sometimes takes up the role of, like, the bigger person, no pun intended. They all play poker together, obviously, and when Penguin, Harvey, and Joker all flew out together to see Hugo Strange's weird invention, he acts as basically a mediator between their egos and keeps them on track.
Get out of my face, clown!
Which one? Gentlemen, it behooves us not to fight amongst ourselves.
And then there's this scene in the episode Second Chance. The plot of the episode is that Two-Face gets kidnapped right before being potentially cured, and no one knows who did it. Batman suspects Oswald at first because he and Harvey supposedly had an off-screen conflict of some kind a while back. Even though he's in jail, Batman pays him a visit.
I'm looking for Two-Face.
Why? Did you lose him?
Somebody kidnapped him from Gotham Central tonight. You and he had a disagreement some time ago, didn't you?
It's true. Harvey stole a rare Avis right out from under my beak several months ago. A jewel-encrusted statuette of a two-headed rock. It was worth millions. But, my dear rodent, I'd never kidnap a fellow rogue out of a sickbed. It just isn't done.
Honor among thieves?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Not to spoil the episode, but it wasn't him who did it. He's presumably telling the truth. This is a man who killed a dude, who gave him important information, unprompted, just killed him via ducky boat for no reason. Just murdered him, because it was easy, I guess. And after Harvey fucked up a whole plot of his, potentially getting him arrested, he forgives him enough to leave him alone to be cured? He respects these guys, or at least Harvey. I could go into my personal theories on that. He seems to respect them as, at least, basically co-workers, but it's not mutual. I'm going to talk about Birds of a Feather now. I feel like most fans of this series know about Birds of a Feather already. There's obviously the main betrayal of the episode, but I feel like people forget that it isn't the first. When he first gets out of prison and declares himself clean and gets home, he expects someone to be there for him.
I'd best prepare myself for the welcoming throngs. Well, fellow rogues, it's great to be back. If you're trying to surprise me, you're doing an excellent job. Say, who's there? Two-Face? Croc? Joker, old shoe?
None of the above, Penguin.
He's effectively not one of them anymore. They don't wish him well at all. Greatly contrasting from Oswald's attitude in Second Chance. They're all villains, obviously, and he basically turned their back on them. They want nothing to do with him anymore. And it does make the episode a whole lot sadder to me. It's just an extra sting. Obviously, quote-unquote respectable society doesn't want him, but once rejected, he really doesn't have anyone or anywhere to go back to. It's not the only difference between him and the others either. He's not a good person, obviously, but he doesn't seem to enjoy being evil like the others do. It very clearly comes from a place of jealousy and resentment. He doesn't have any overarching goal or plan. He doesn't even seem to have a consistent place to live. And obviously, none of this is intentional. They're continuity errors that come from a crew not having any kind of idea what to do with him. But what I'm getting at is that it very much plays like a character trait. Remember what I said at the beginning. Penguin has always been a poser. The world hasn't given him any clear idea of what his identity could even be. He's not a very good or successful villain. He doesn't even enjoy it. Considering how miserable and angry he is all the time, it's a really stark difference in Birds of a Feather when he's allowed normal human interaction. For a while, obviously. The reclusive sewer man is now laughing and singing and being really gregarious. It's a remarkable difference, but again, it gets taken away. It seems like he's just trying a lot of things and gets punished no matter what. Sometimes justly, sometimes not. The lack of an overarching plot given to him feels almost realistic in a way. Neither of these versions of him, whether he's trying to be a good person or a villain, are quote-unquote his true nature like Batman Returns tries to portray. He's just kind of lost, making fairly understandable choices given the things we see happening to him. It's very compelling to me. Even the comic retcon they gave to transition his design into the new Batman Adventures one makes sense. He's been fucking around and finding out for a long time and not enjoying it. Having a near-death experience could genuinely make someone turn their entire life around like that. If the crew had actually used this as a plotline instead of a get-out-of-characterization free card, it could have tied everything together really nicely, but why would they do that? Isn't it kind of sadly fitting that this character's whole conflict is about rejection and isolation, and he was hated by the team that was working on him? That a disorganized production accidentally resulted in a character whose life is fittingly just in shambles all the time? I don't know, it scratches an itch for me, and it fits alongside the other tragic animated series characterizations really well. It's funny to me that in the scrapped Writer's Bible notes, it makes specific mention that Penguin only uses people to get what he wants and then throws them away, because it consistently ended up being the complete opposite. It's someone who desperately wants human connection from someone, almost anyone, but won't find it anywhere. Not among normal citizens, not among the psychopaths he's trying to fight alongside. And in a meta sense, not by the people who wrote him, and up to this point, not even really by the audience. Besides me, I guess. Because I have no life.